Come closer, and let the shadow lift from your eyes, for the most beautiful stories are like me, small sparks of light that defy the night. I am Candela, and tonight my fire lights not only this room, but the deepest corner of an artist's workshop in ancient Cyprus. This is a story about the longing for perfection, about the silence of ivory, and about how love, when it is true, has the power to warm even the coldest of materials. I speak to you of Pygmalion, a man who sought not a wife, but a miracle. Ovid's verses tell that this young sculptor lived in a solitude of his own choosing. He had seen the Propoetides, those women of Amathus who, for denying the divinity of Venus, were punished to lose all shame, until at last they were turned to hard stone. Horrified by the vices he believed he saw, Pygmalion closed the doors of his heart and devoted himself entirely to his art. But an artist's solitude is never empty. The painter Edward Burne-Jones captured this beginning in his series Pygmalion and the Image, a cycle that took him years to complete. In the first canvas, The Heart Desires, we see the sculptor in his studio, his gaze thoughtful and lost, ignoring the women who watch him from outside. His palette is dusty and gray, reflecting that inner world where he searches for a beauty that reality seems to deny him. And so Pygmalion began to carve a block of ivory, white as snow. This was no ordinary work, it was an obsession to find perfection in love through a creation of his own. With a skill that seemed dictated by the gods themselves, he gave shape to a maiden of a beauty impossible to find in nature. Pygmalion's art was so perfect that it concealed the art itself. The statue seemed not a lifeless object, but a maiden who, if she did not move, did so only out of virginal modesty. He gazed at her, and little by little, admiration turned to passion. His hands began to caress the ivory, to see whether it was flesh or stone. He refused to believe that she did not breathe. For what Pygmalion pursued did not exist in any woman of flesh and blood, it was the perfect beauty the philosophers dreamed of, the pure form that only art can hope to touch. And so his chisel sought not just any wife, but the very promise of perfection, carved in the whitest ivory. Jean Rose, in his Rococo vision of 1717, shows us a Pygmalion kneeling, in an attitude of almost mystical adoration. In his painting Pygmalion adoring his statue, the figure dominates the center, draped in cloths that seem real, while little cherubs peek among the tools of the workshop. It is a scene full of theatricality, of fluid and delicate brushwork. Burne-Jones too devoted a second canvas to this moment, The Hand Refrains, where the sculptor gazes at his work, moved, realizing with a certain tragedy that he has fallen in love with something unreal, his hand held back, afraid that too strong a touch might shatter the illusion. But Pygmalion treated his creation as if she were flesh and blood. Ovid tells us, with great tenderness, how he brought her gifts that please young girls, shells polished by the sea, colored stones, little birds that sang in cages, and flowers of 1,000 hues. He dressed her in fine robes, placed gems on her fingers and strings of pearls at her neck. Everything suited her, yet to him, nothing was more beautiful than she herself. He laid her upon coverlets dyed with the purple of Sidon, and rested her ivory head upon soft pillows of feathers, convinced that she could feel the softness of repose. That love for the statue was, for him, a refuge from the fear of the vulnerability that comes with loving a real being. Then came the Feast of Venus, that celebration known as the Aphrodite, which filled Cyprus with incense and prayers. It was a festival of great importance on the island, the birthplace of the goddess, where heifers with gilded horns were sacrificed, and the sacred smoke rose to the heavens. Pygmalion fulfilled all the rites, for the goddess is deeply moved by the devotion of mortals. Yet before the altar, his courage failed him. He dared not ask that his statue come to life. Instead, he murmured a humbler plea, "Grant that my wife be like the one of ivory." Jean-Baptiste Regnault painted this sacred moment in 1786, in his work Pygmalion Praying to Venus. In it, the man offers his desire to the divine. Golden Venus, who attended her feast unseen, understood the true longing of that heart. In answer, the flame upon the altar leapt 3 times, rising into the air like a tongue of fire, "The very omen I offer you tonight." When Pygmalion returned to his workshop, the silence received him as always, yet something in the air was different. He drew near his beloved statue and, between hope and fear, he kissed her. As he drew back his lips, he felt an unaccustomed warmth. He kissed her again, and his hands caressed the ivory breast. And then the metamorphosis began. The material softened, yielding to his fingers as wax grows soft beneath the sun. Pygmalion stood astonished, torn between delirious joy and the fear that he was dreaming. In 1819, and Louis Girodet immortalized this miracle on the canvas that now rests in the Louvre. We see a Pygmalion in a robe of intense red, the color of passion, leaning back in surprise as divine light bathes the scene. Between them floats a mischievous Cupid joining their hands, the only one who seems to know exactly what is happening. It is a moment of mystery, wrapped in the smoke of a censer. But perhaps the most striking image is that of Jean-Léon Gérôme. In his work Pygmalion and Galatea, we see life itself breaking through. The upper part of the maiden is already warm, rosy flesh, her arms closing in an embrace around Pygmalion's neck, while her legs, still white and cold, remain bound to the pedestal. She is half ivory, half woman, the border between creation and existence, crossed by a passionate kiss. Pygmalion felt beneath his hand the veins beginning to pulse. That mouth he had kissed so often when it was cold now returned his warmth. The maiden opened her eyes and, for the first time, beheld at once the sky and her beloved. She was no longer an object to be gazed upon, but a soul with whom to share a life. And perhaps you wonder what her name was. The truth is that in Ovid's verses she has no name. The poet calls her only the maiden, the work, the beloved. The name Galatea was given to her by tradition, many centuries later. Perhaps that silence was beautiful, for to keep her nameless, newly born, made all the more miraculous the moment when ivory turned to flesh. Burne-Jones closes his cycle with two canvases, the Godhead fires and the soul attains, showing Aphrodite breathing in the vital spark. And, at last, the sculptor kneeling before a fully human Galatea, who accepts his proposal of marriage. Venus herself attended the wedding she had brought about, blessing a union where art and nature merged in a single embrace. From that love was born Paphos, the daughter who would give her name to the city and to the whole island, reminding us that the longing for beauty, when born of devotion and not of pride, can move the very gods. Pygmalion no longer needed ivory to create worlds, for the whole world now breathed at his side. And yet, the lineage that began with this miracle would carry in its blood the seed of future tragedies, for Paphos would be the mother of Cinyras, whose fate would be marked by the forbidden love of his own daughter, Myrrha. And this story did not remain in ivory. Centuries later, the playwright Bernard Shaw brought it into our world in his play Pygmalion. There the sculptor is a professor of phonetics, and the statue, a humble flower girl he teaches to speak like a lady. From it, later, was born the musical My Fair Lady. And even the psychologists borrowed its name. They call the Pygmalion effect a very old truth, that when someone truly believes in another, their faith can give them life, just as the sculptor's longing gave warmth to the ivory. My flame is fading now, but not the light of this story, which has inspired painters, sculptors, and poets for thousands of years. Remember, as you withdraw into silence, that even in the hardest and coldest of your own lives there is always a spark waiting for the warmth of a true gaze to begin to beat. And if this little light has kept you company, do not let it go out. Subscribe, and I will light this candle again to tell you the next ancient story. May my light stay with you, as the marble of your dreams learns, too, to breathe.